A boy discovers that the entire planet is a reality show built for aliens who are about to cancel it. A girl sits alone in her room, crying, deleting her own face and sending out a fake one in its place. A whole town lowers its standards so far that nobody feels shame about anything anymore. These moments come from different South Park episodes, made years apart, and most people remember them as quick, cheap jokes about trashy reality television. They are something much bigger than that. For more than a decade, across episode after episode, the show was quietly building one single argument, and almost nobody noticed. Its real target the whole time was the people sitting at home watching. Tonight we walk slowly through 10 of those episodes, in the order they aired, and follow that quiet argument from its very beginning, all the way to the saddest, gentlest ending the show ever made. Welcome to East Park. Let's begin. The show nobody knew they were on. By the year 2003, television had quietly changed shape. Regular people, the kind who had never acted in anything and never planned to, were suddenly all over the screen. They were stuck on islands and made to vote each other off. They were locked inside houses with cameras in every corner. They were lined up and judged for the way they sang, the way they looked, and the way they handled losing. Shows like this were cheap to make and easy to watch, and they spread fast. A normal night of television started to feel like a long parade of strangers being filmed while they cried, fought, and tried to win money. Most people did not think very hard about what they were watching. They just watched. South Park had been on the air for 6 years by then, and the people making it had grown sharp. The early days of crude jokes and shaky animation had turned into something steadier and meaner and smarter. The show could still be silly, and it still loved a good fart joke, but underneath the silliness, it had started asking bigger questions about the world it lived in. Season 7 opened with one of those questions hidden inside a goofy story about aliens. The episode was called Cancel. It first aired on March 19, 2003, and it was the 97th episode of the whole series. Trey Parker wrote it. On the surface, it looked like a normal space adventure. Down at the bottom, it was about being watched. The episode begins in a strange way. It replays the very first scene of the very first South Park episode, almost word for word. Cartman walks to the bus stop and tells the others about a dream where aliens stuck something up his rear end. Stan, Kyle, and Kenny stand around the same way they did years before. For a few seconds, it feels like the show is just repeating itself. Then the boys start to notice. They get the odd, dizzy feeling that all of this has happened before, like a memory playing twice. Chef notices it too. Something is wrong with the world, and nobody can explain it, and that small itch of wrongness is what pulls the whole story forward. The reason for the strange repeat turns out to be simple and huge at the same time. The boys are pulled up into a spaceship where they meet an alien who first appears looking exactly like Randy Marsh. The alien explains that he picked a friendly, familiar face on purpose so the boys would feel calm. When the kids ask to see what he really looks like, he drops the disguise and becomes a horrible creature with sharp teeth and too many legs. The boys are grossed out, so they make him keep changing into other shapes, flipping through famous faces and cartoon characters until Cartman finally asks him to turn into a taco that poops ice cream. It is a dumb, wonderful moment. It is also a clever trick because while the audience is laughing at the shape-shifting taco, the episode quietly slips in the real news. The news is this: Earth is not a planet in the normal sense. Earth is a television show. Every person, every animal, every ocean and mountain and city, all of it was built and arranged by aliens as a giant program for other planets to watch. Human beings are the cast, except none of them ever knew they were cast members. They were born onto the set and lived their whole lives inside the show without once being told there were cameras. The aliens running the whole thing are a group called the Jusians, and they act exactly like television bosses. They care about ratings, they care about whether the show is still fun to watch, and they have decided that Earth has gone stale. The program is old. People have stopped tuning in, so they are going to cancel it, which is where the title comes from, and which is why the boys felt that creepy sense of repetition. A canceled show gets shoved into reruns, and the strange deja vu was the universe playing an old episode again before pulling the plug for good. What makes this land is how calmly the show delivers it. There is no big dramatic music telling the audience to gasp. The alien explains that Earth is a reality program the same flat way a person might explain where they work. The horror is supposed to sneak up slowly, after the laughing stops. Everything that has ever happened on Earth, every war and birthday and quiet ordinary afternoon, was content. It was made to fill time and hold attention, and the moment it stopped holding attention, it was worthless to the people in charge. The boys do what people in South Park always do when something is unfair. They refuse to accept it. Chef and the kids decide to fight back, and the story turns into a trip across space to beg the network to keep the show alive. They travel to meet the bosses and plead their case, trying to prove that Earth still has some life left in it, that it is still worth airing. There is a real sweetness buried in that idea. A bunch of small creatures who just found out their entire existence was entertainment for someone else. And instead of giving up, they go and argue that their lives matter enough to keep broadcasting. It is funny and a little sad at the same time, which is a mix South Park is very good at. The ending pushes the joke one step further. After all the running around, the show closes with a commercial. Not a real commercial for a real product, a pretend advertisement for Earth itself, the way a network might run a promo to get viewers excited about the next big season. And the clip it chooses to show off, the exciting preview meant to pull an audience back in, is the invasion of Iraq, which was happening in the real world at the exact time the episode aired. The message is hard to miss once it clicks. Real human suffering, real war, real death, all of it repackaged as a thrilling teaser to keep the ratings up. The show is saying that the worst things people do can become just another exciting moment on the screen if someone frames it the right way. It helps to remember where the show was sitting when this came out. Kenny had died at the end of the previous season in a sadder and more final way than usual, and he had stayed gone for a long stretch. In Cancelled, he simply shows up again, alive, back at the bus stop like nothing happened. The episode treats his return as part of the joke about reruns and repeats, a character snapping back into place because the show needs him there. That small detail fits the whole theme. Characters on a program do not get to choose when they live or die. They appear when the show wants them and vanish when it does not. Now, the deeper idea, underneath all the alien nonsense, Cancelled is built on a feeling that was creeping into real life in those years. Cameras were starting to follow ordinary people everywhere, and being filmed was becoming normal. The episode takes that creeping feeling and blows it up to the size of the entire planet. It asks a quiet, uncomfortable question. If a camera is always pointed at a person and an audience is always half watching, does the person start performing their own life instead of just living it? Reality television runs on that exact trick. The people on those shows know they are being filmed, so they get louder, bolder, meaner, and more dramatic than they would ever be alone. They become characters playing themselves. Cancelled takes that and asks what happens when nobody even knows the camera is there, and the answer it lands on is grim and funny. The watching is the whole point. The lives only matter as long as someone enjoys watching them. There is also a sharp little joke about who holds the power in all of this. The aliens are not evil masterminds with some grand plan. They are bored executives. They want good numbers and fresh ideas, and when a show stops giving them that, they kill it without much feeling. That is a very specific kind of cruelty, the cruelty of people who are simply not interested anymore. Reality television works the same way behind the scene. A person can be plucked from a normal life, turned into a star, chewed up for a season or two, and then dropped the second the audience drifts to something newer. The show does not hate them. The show just got bored. Cancelled understood that early, and it dressed the understanding up in green aliens and a pooping taco so it could go down easy. The reason this episode makes such a strong opening for the bigger story is that it sets the rule that everything else will follow. South Park, over and over across its long life, keeps circling back to a single belief about reality television. The shows themselves are not really the problem. The problem is the watching. A reality program only exists because people sit down and give it their eyes and their hours. The producers are chasing the audience. The stars are performing for the audience. The whole strange machine is powered by ordinary people at home, deciding what is worth their attention. Cancelled puts that belief right at the center by making the audience invisible and enormous, a whole sky full of alien viewers whose interest is the only thing keeping Earth turning. Once that idea is in place, every later episode about a specific reality show becomes a closer look at the same machine, just zoomed in on one piece of it. What stays with a person after watching Cancelled is not the plot. The plot is loose and goofy and a little forgettable. What stays is the feeling it leaves behind, a soft unease that lingers after the credits. It is the thought that maybe being watched changes a person more than they realize. It is the worry that real pain can be turned into a fun preview if the timing is right. It is the strange flatness of imagining that the people in charge could simply lose interest in everything and switch it all off. The episode wraps these heavy thoughts inside one of the lightest, dumbest stories the show ever told, and that contrast is the trick. The laughing keeps the door open just long enough for the darker idea to walk in. By treating the entire world as one big reality show, South Park gave itself a frame it could use again and again. Every future episode about cameras and fame and ordinary people becoming stars would sit inside this idea, like smaller boxes nested inside a bigger one. The world is the show, the people are the cast, the audience is the boss, and nobody on the set ever truly agreed to any of it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Canceling answers a big question by making the whole planet the answer. The next question the show would tackle is smaller and stranger, and somehow even sharper. It is not about who is being watched. It is about what kind of person the watching can turn into a star, even when that person has done nothing at all to earn it. There was a particular face that filled magazines and screens in those years, a face famous for being famous, and South South Park was about to take a very hard, very mean look at exactly what that fame was teaching the youngest people watching at home. Section 2. Famous for nothing at all. By the time this episode arrived, one person had become impossible to escape. Paris Hilton was on magazine covers and television screens almost every day, and the strange thing about her fame was that nobody could quite say what she had done to earn it. She had not written a great book or starred in a beloved film or invented anything useful. She came from a rich hotel family, and a private video of her had leaked, and then she landed her own reality show called The Simple Life, where the whole joke was watching a spoiled rich girl struggle to do normal jobs on a farm. That show, and the gossip around her, turned her into one of the most talked about people in the country. She was famous mostly for being famous. The cameras followed her because people watched, and people watched because the cameras followed her, and the circle just kept spinning. South Park noticed, and in season 8 it answered with an episode that aired on December 1st, 2004. It was the 123rd episode of the series, and Trey Parker and Matt Stone wrote and directed it together. The episode is called Stupid Spoiled Whore Video Playset, and the long, ugly title is a clue to what the show was angry about. The story takes the empty kind of fame that Paris Hilton stood for and asks a simple, hard question. What does it do to the little girls who look up to her? The answer the episode gives is not gentle. The story starts at the South Park Mall, where Paris Hilton shows up to greet a crowd of excited fans and promote her clothing and her brand. She announces that she is opening a store in town. The store sells a toy, and the toy is the center of the whole episode. It comes with a little camera so that a child can film herself the same way a reality star films her own life. The idea is that a girl can play at being Paris Hilton, recording everything, performing for an audience that may or may not be there. A toy that teaches a child to point a camera at herself and act spoiled and grown up is a sharp, mean joke, and the show plays it with a straight face. The episode is also poking at real toys from that time, the kind of fashion dolls dressed in tiny grown-up clothes that were sold hard to very young girls. South Park simply pushed that real marketing one step further until it became impossible to defend. The 4th grade girls in town fall for it completely. Almost all of them start copying Paris Hilton, dressing like her and acting like her and treating her behavior as the goal to reach. The one girl who refuses is Wendy Testaberger. Wendy looks at the whole craze and sees something wrong in it, and she says so, which gets her pushed out of the group. Her friends treat her like she is the strange one for not joining in. That detail matters because it shows how the pressure works. The girl with sense becomes the outsider, and the empty trend becomes the normal thing everyone is expected to want. Wendy is left standing alone, trying to explain that the person they all admire has nothing worth admiring, while the rest of them roll their eyes at her. Running alongside this is a second story that makes the point even darker through comedy. Paris Hilton keeps losing her tiny pet dogs, who keep dying around her because of how poorly she treats them. Needing a replacement, she sets her eyes on Butters, and she tries to buy him from his parents the way a person might buy a new pet to fill the gap left by an old one. She offers them an enormous pile of money for their son, and his parents, Steven and Linda, actually consider it. They are tempted by the cash, and they treat the chance to sell their child as a real decision rather than something monstrous. The show is making fun of how money and fame can twist normal people into doing terrible things just to be near a celebrity, or just to grab a piece of the wealth that floats around one. A famous person treats a child like a pet, and the parents treat the child like a thing to be sold, and everyone behaves as if this is somehow reasonable. The person who finally pushes back is an unexpected one. Wendy goes for advice to Mr. Slave, a grown man with a wild and openly crude past. He is one of the last characters anyone would expect to give a wholesome lesson, and yet his message is the clear heart of the whole episode. He tells Wendy that he himself is a person who behaves in shameful ways, and that this is exactly why no child should be looking up to him, or to anyone like Paris Hilton. His point is that admiring an empty, attention-hungry celebrity is a mistake, and that the adults in a child's life are supposed to be the ones who teach that lesson. The episode then builds to a strange, gross contest between Mr. Slave and Paris Hilton, the kind of over-the-top, disgusting showdown the show loved to stage. Mr. Slave wins it in a revolting way, and the win is meant to prove that the woman everyone idolizes can be beaten at her own game by someone who at least admits what he is. As a small bonus for longtime fans, when Paris ends up trapped inside Mr. Slave, she runs into the little Frog King character from an earlier episode, a quiet callback that rewards anyone paying close attention. Around all the silliness sits the real argument, and the episode is careful to say it out loud through Mr. Slave near the end. He gives a short speech explaining that young girls should not be dressing and behaving in grown-up, trashy ways, and that the fault lies with the adults who never taught them better. His line of thinking is that if parents do not teach their children to look down on people like Paris Hilton, then those children have nowhere to learn it, and they will simply copy whatever the screen hands them. The episode is not interested in being subtle about this. It wants the lesson stated plainly, because the thing it is worried about is plain too. Children copy what they see. If the most visible, most celebrated person in the country is famous for nothing good, then nothing good is what gets copied. What makes the episode work is the calm, almost flat way it treats the most outrageous parts. A toy with a camera for kids to film themselves is presented like a normal product. A celebrity buying a child is presented like a business deal. Parents weighing whether to sell their son are shown sitting at their kitchen table, talking it over. The show does not scream that these things are insane. It lets them sit there, ordinary and quiet, until the wrongness of each one slowly rises to the surface. That steadiness is what gives the comedy its bite. The further the events drift from anything sane, the more straight-faced the show becomes, and the gap between how calm it looks and how mad it actually is becomes the joke. The deeper idea underneath the episode connects straight back to where this whole story began. Reality television, and the fame it makes, runs on attention. A person becomes a star because enough people decide to watch, and the watching is what gives that person power. Paris Hilton did not have to be talented to be huge. She only had to be watched, and once she was huge, her behavior became a kind of instruction sheet for the people watching her, especially the young ones still figuring out who they want to be. The toy in the episode makes this almost too clear. It hands a child a camera and tells her to perform her own life, to turn herself into content, to chase the same hollow attention that made Paris Hilton rich. The show is pointing at a chain that goes from the audience, to the star, to the child copying the star, and back to the audience again. Each link feeds the next. There is something especially sad in the way the episode handles Wendy. She is right about everything, and being right costs her. Her friends abandon her. The trend rolls on without her, and for most of the episode, her good sense buys her nothing but loneliness. The show is honest about that. Doing the smart thing in a world that rewards the empty thing does not make a person popular. It often does the opposite. By putting the one sensible girl on the outside, the episode admits that the pull of empty fame is strong enough to make wisdom look like weakness, and to make the foolish crowd feel like the safe place to be. Years later, the episode would gain an extra layer that the writers could not have planned. Paris Hilton herself eventually spoke about it. In a book she wrote about her life, published well into adulthood, she described watching this episode and feeling hurt by how she was shown. That small fact does something interesting to the whole thing. The episode was busy treating her as a symbol, a stand-in for empty fame, a cardboard figure to knock down, and the real person behind the symbol was someone who could be wounded by it, someone who carried the memory of it for years. It is a reminder that the famous faces the audience chews up are still people. The show was making a fair point about the culture, and at the same time, it was aiming that point at a living human being who felt the sting of it long after. Both of those things can be true together, and sitting with that discomfort is part of taking the episode seriously. The episode also earned real respect over time, with one well-known British newspaper later naming it among the 10 best South Park episodes of its decade, which suggests the anger inside it struck a lot of people as the right kind of anger. The thing this episode adds to the larger story is a sharper sense of who the attention machine rewards. The opening idea was that the whole world runs as a show powered by an audience. This episode narrows that down and looks at one kind of star the audience keeps crowning, the person famous for nothing, and it follows the damage downhill to where it lands hardest, on children. Reality fame does not stay on the screen. It seeps into toy stores and bedrooms and the way a 9-year-old thinks she is supposed to act. The audience picks an empty hero, and the youngest viewers, who cannot yet tell empty from full, take that hero as the model for a whole life. The episode treats that as a quiet emergency dressed up as a joke. What lingers after watching is the picture of Wendy standing apart from the others, sure of herself and alone with it. The gross-out contest fades from memory, and the wild plot blurs, but the image of the sensible kid being treated as the odd one out stays sharp because it feels true. Anyone who has ever refused to chase a popular, hollow thing knows that exact loneliness. The show found a way to put that feeling on screen and wrap it inside a story about a celebrity buying a child and losing a contest in the most disgusting way possible. And the wrapping is what lets the real feeling slip through. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The attention machine, then, does two things at once. It lifts up people who have done nothing, and it teaches the watching children to want the same nothing for themselves. That is a heavy charge to lay at the feet of a few cheap television shows and a toy with a camera in it. The show was not finished making it. There was another promise that this kind of television liked to sell, a promise that sounded almost kind on the surface. It claimed that the same cameras and the same experts could take a broken, out-of-control child and fix him, repair him, right there on the screen for everyone to watch. South Park would put that promise to the test, and to test it properly, the show reached for the single most difficult, most monstrous child it had ever created, and set the cameras on him. Section 3. The promise of a quick fix. By the middle of the 2000s, a new kind of show had taken over family television. The setup was always the same. A household was falling apart, usually because of one out-of-control child or one impossible problem, and then an expert arrived to set it right. A stern nanny would march into a messy home, study the screaming and the chaos, and promise that within a few short days, the family would be calm and happy. Cameras followed every meltdown and every breakthrough. By the end of the episode, the wild child sat quietly, the parents wept with relief, and the whole mess looked solved. Shows like Nanny 911 and Super Nanny made this their entire shape, and people loved them because the shows offered something deeply comforting. They said that no problem was too big, that anything broken could be repaired, and that the repair could happen fast and on camera for everyone to see. South Park took a long look at that promise and decided to test it. The episode aired on May 3rd, 2006, in the show's 10th season, and it was the 146th episode of the series. Trey Parker wrote and directed it. The episode is called Cyst, named after the short, sharp sound a famous television dog trainer makes to correct an animal. To test whether reality television could really fix a broken child, the show chose the most broken child it had ever made. It chose Eric Cartman. Cartman, by this point, had years of history behind him. He was selfish in a way that went past normal childhood selfishness. He was cruel for fun, dishonest by habit, and willing to do genuinely awful things to get what he wanted. He ran his own home, bossing his sweet and weak-willed mother Leanne around until she gave him whatever he asked for. If any child on television was beyond fixing, it was him. That is exactly why the episode picked him. A show about repairing a slightly naughty kid would prove nothing. A show about repairing Cartman would push the promise of reality television to its breaking point. The story begins when Cartman goes too far at school and hurts another student badly enough to land the boy in the hospital. His mother is called in, and she finally admits out loud that she cannot control her own son, that he runs both of their lives, and that she has no idea what to do. The school counselor, Mr. Mackey, suggests she try the parenting help shows on television, so Leanne turns to the same experts that real worried parents were turning to in those years. She calls in the nannies. The first to arrive is a nanny straight out of one of those shows, complete with a camera crew trailing behind her, just like the real thing. She walks in expecting a difficult child she can handle, because handling difficult children is her whole job. Cartman destroys her. He does it coldly and on purpose. He figures out what will wound her most, and he aims for it, attacking her with cruel words about her own life until she is so shaken and disgusted that she gives up and leaves. The expert who was supposed to fix him cannot even last the day. The second expert comes next, the famous Super Nanny type, and she arrives full of confidence and promises a brand new Cartman in only 3 days. He breaks her completely. Whatever he does to her is left mostly to the imagination, but the result is shown plainly. She does not just quit. She loses her mind and ends up locked away in a hospital for the mentally ill, reduced to a state too grim and gross to describe kindly. Two professionals, both armed with cameras and television fame and years of success, are wrecked by a single 10-year-old boy. The doctor treating the ruined Super Nanny is the one who points Leanne toward the last expert, and this is where the episode turns its sharpest joke. The person who finally makes progress with Cartman is not a child expert at all. He is a dog trainer. The show brings in a clear version of Cesar Millan, the calm, famous man from the dog training show, who walks into the Cartman home and treats Eric exactly the way he would treat a misbehaving dog. He corrects him with a firm touch to the neck and that short, sharp sound the episode is named after. He does not argue with Cartman or try to reason with him or beg him to be good. He simply refuses to let the boy run the show, the same way he refuses to let a dog run a household. And slowly, against all odds, it starts to work. Cartman begins to behave. The change is real enough that the boy himself notices it happening to him, and he hates it. The most important part of the dog trainer's method is not aimed at Cartman at all. It is aimed at his mother. The trainer tells Leanne that the true problem was never only the child. The problem was that she had given up her place as the head of the home. She had let her son lead, and a child who leads a household becomes a small tyrant. So the trainer teaches her to be the leader again, to be calm and firm and unmovable, to stop handing Cartman whatever he demands the moment he demands it. When Leanne finally does this, when she stops bending, Cartman has nothing left to push against, and he settles down. The fix, in other words, was never about a magic expert with a camera. It was about a parent finding the strength to actually be the parent. Cartman does not take his transformation peacefully. As he feels himself becoming an obedient, well-mannered child, he grows desperate because being good feels to him like dying. He decides the only way to get his old life back is to get rid of his mother, and he tries to talk the other boys into helping him do something terrible to her. They refuse. Left on his own, he creeps toward her room in the night to carry out his plan, and at the very edge of doing it, something inside him stops him. A part of him he had buried long ago, a small voice of conscience, comes clawing back to the the surface. He fights against it, his whole body twisting and shaking, until he throws up a stream of black fluid, as if vomiting out the evil that had lived in him, and collapses. The next morning, he comes downstairs changed. He sits doing his homework, eating a healthy breakfast, polite and quiet and good. The fix appears complete. The promise of the shows seems, against all reason, to have come true even for the worst child imaginable. And then the episode does the thing that makes it honest. Leanne, looking at her calm and pleasant son, feels a pang of loss. She misses being needed by him in the old way, misses buying his love with toys and treats. So she offers to take him shopping and to get him fast food, sliding right back into the bribery that broke him in the first place. In an instant, the whole transformation crumbled. Cartman snaps back into his old self, the fix undone the moment the discipline stops, and the episode ends with him in his mother's arms, turning to look knowingly toward the camera, fully himself again. All the work, all the careful training, all the hard-won change, gone the second the easy reward returned. The calm way the show stages all this is part of what makes it land. The camera crews and the confident experts and the household visits are filmed to feel exactly like the real shows they are based on, so the whole thing slides down like a normal episode of parenting television before it turns strange and dark. The music adds to the odd mood, with Cartman at one point breaking into a famous old rock song mid-scene. The ending, with its knowing look at the camera, borrows the feel of a creepy horror film, hinting that the evil child was never truly gone. The show keeps a steady, almost gentle surface over a story that is actually saying something harsh about how change really works. The deeper idea underneath the comedy is a quiet attack on the comfort those shows were selling. Real television loved to promise a 3-day miracle, a tidy repair wrapped up before the credits, because a tidy repair makes a satisfying thing to watch. An audience wants the wild child to end the episode calm and the crying parents to end it smiling. T agrees that the fix is possible, and then it refuses to let the fix stick. It shows that lasting change is slow and hard and mostly about the grown-ups, and that the moment anyone stops doing the difficult work, the old trouble comes flooding back. Real problems do not solve themselves in 22 minutes for the pleasure of viewers at home. They take steady effort that never really ends, and they fall apart the instant that effort stops. The show is gently telling its audience that the comforting story those programs sell is a lie, and a lie that real worried parents might actually believe. There is also a sly point hidden in the choice of who finally succeeds. The trained child experts fail and break. The one who works is a man who trains animals, because the only way to handle Cartman turned out to be treating him like a creature with no reason and no shame. That is a dark thing to say about the boy, and the show says it without flinching. The expert does not appeal to Cartman's better nature, because the joke is that Cartman has no better nature to appeal to. He responds only to a firm hand and a clear leader, the same as a dog. Something interesting happened with this episode out in the real world. The actual dog trainer the show based its expert on watched it and loved it. He said the episode was wonderful, and that the writers had captured his real methods so well that they had clearly studied his show closely. He even noted that parents had started telling him they were now using his dog training ideas on their own children, with good results. So the parody became a strange kind of compliment, and the joke about treating a child like an animal turned out to contain real advice that real families actually used. The episode also became a favorite among fans and earned strong reviews, partly because of how cleanly it pulled off being both very funny and quietly serious about how families really heal or fail to heal. What this episode adds to the larger story is a hard truth about the comfort that this kind of television offers. The world had already been shown as a show that runs on an audience, and the empty stars that audience crowns had already been shown teaching children the wrong thing. Now comes the other half of the bargain. These programs do not only entertain, they reassure. They promise that anything broken can be mended quickly and watched while it mends, that a stranger with a camera can walk into a falling apart home and walk out leaving it whole. TSE takes that reassurance and shows the cracks in it. The fix is shallow, the change is fragile, the cameras leave, the effort stops, and the trouble comes back, because the trouble was never as simple as the show pretended. What stays in the mind afterward is that final image of Cartman in his mother's arms, looking out with quiet, knowing eyes, restored to his worst self the moment comfort and reward return. It is funny and it is unsettling at the same time. It says that the easy fix was never real, that the hard work was the only thing keeping the monster down, and that the monster is endlessly patient. Anyone who has ever tried to change a deep habit in themselves or in someone they love recognizes the truth in that snapback. The show buried that truth inside a story about nannies and a dog trainer and a boy vomiting black sludge, and the burying is what let the truth slip past the laughter and stay. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The cameras in this episode pointed at a spoiled child and and promised to repair him for the entertainment of strangers. Soon those same cameras would turn towards something far heavier to look at. A person genuinely falling apart, lost to addiction, dragged to the lowest point of their life, with the whole painful descent shaped into a dramatic show that followed a careful formula built to make an audience feel things. South Park would take that grim and serious format and hand it, of all things, to a talking towel. Section 4. A towel falls apart on camera. By 2010, a different kind of show had found a large and loyal audience. These programs did not chase fun or comfort, they chased pain. The most famous of them followed real people who were lost to drugs or drink, and it filmed them at the lowest point of their lives. The shape was always the same. A person was shown in their daily ruin, doing desperate and ugly things to feed their habit, while the people who loved them spoke to the camera through tears. The person being filmed was told they were part of a documentary about addiction, a calm and serious project meant to teach. They did not know the truth. The truth was that at the end, the cameras would still be rolling when their family surrounded them in a surprise meeting, read them letters begging them to get help, and offered to send them away to get better. The whole thing followed a careful pattern, with quiet narration, plain white words on a black screen marking each stage, and a steady build toward a single emotional moment. It was real suffering, shaped into a story with a beginning, a middle, and a tidy, hopeful end, served up for an audience that came back week after week to feel something. South Park decided to copy that shape exactly, and then to pour the most ridiculous thing it could think of into it. The episode aired on April 28, 2010, in the show's 14th season, and it was the 202nd episode of the series. Trey Parker wrote and directed it, and it carries the strange title, Crippled Summer. To play the role of the broken addict at the center of a serious documentary about addiction, the show did not pick a sad and believable human. It picked Towley. Towley needs a little explaining for anyone who does not know him. He is a talking towel. The show created him years earlier, almost as a dare, a deliberately pointless character, a soft white bath towel with a face and a voice, who wanders into scenes giving useless advice and reminding people to bring a towel. His main trait from the start was that he loved getting high. He was a joke about lazy, stoned hangers-on, and the writers always knew he was silly. Building a heavy, tearful story about addiction around a character that absurd is the entire engine of the episode. The mismatch between the serious shape and the ridiculous subject is where everything interesting happens. The episode announces what it is doing right away. Instead of the usual joking warning that opens a normal South Park, it begins with a solemn disclaimer read aloud in a grave voice, copying the kind of serious notice the real addiction show used. The voice warns that the program contains material some viewers may find disturbing and advises caution in the exact tone of a show that wants to feel important and real. From that first moment, the look and feel of the famous documentary is locked in. Plain white words appear on a black screen to mark each turn of the story, the same way the real show labeled its segments. The narration stays quiet and serious. The pattern is followed so closely that, if a person squinted, they might briefly forget they were watching a cartoon about a talking towel and think they had landed on the genuine article. The story itself follows Towley sinking deeper into trouble. He had always been a marijuana user, but here his habit has spread far past that into much harder and stranger things, including substances no person should ever put into their body. He has a job at a summer camp, and his addiction grows so out of control that he does degrading things to get money for drugs right there on camp property until he is fired in disgrace. He even has a small towel son depending on him, which makes his fall heavier. Each stage of his decline is marked by those plain white captions, treating the collapse of a bath towel with the same hushed seriousness the real show used for human beings whose lives were truly falling apart. Then the boys decide to step in and save him, and the episode reaches the part the whole shape was built toward. They stage the surprise meeting, the one where everyone who cares about the lost soul gathers in a room to confront him and read him heartfelt letters. The real show made these meetings its emotional peak, the moment the audience waited for, where love and pain spilled out and the addict was finally cornered into facing the damage. South Park sets up that exact moment and then knocks it sideways. When it is Cartman's turn to read his letter, the kind and tearful words the shape demands never come. He launches instead into a long, hateful rant that has nothing to do with Towley at all and never once mentions him. The serious shape calls for a loving letter, so the episode hands over a letter that is the opposite of loving, and the gap between what the moment is supposed to be and what actually happens lays the whole thing bare. To make the copy complete, a real expert from the Genuine Addiction Show even appears, the kind of professional who leads these meetings in real life, stepping into the cartoon to run the intervention. Alongside the Towley story runs a second one that has little to do with reality television, but says something about the episode's mood. At the same summer camp, which is a camp for disabled children, a boy named Jimmy competes in games, while a jealous camper named Nathan and his slow-witted helper Mimsy scheme to hurt him. Their plots keep blowing up in their own faces, in the bouncy, harmless way of an old Saturday morning cartoon where the villain always ends up flattened by his own trap. Several of the campers are even drawn to resemble classic cartoon characters. The strange touch is that the serious white captions from the addiction story spill over into this silly subplot too, narrating cartoon mishaps in the same hushed, important voice, which stretches the joke about the borrowed shape across the entire episode. The cleverest part of what the show is doing sits in that borrowed shape itself. The real addiction program had a pattern so strong and so familiar that the pattern almost did the emotional work on its own. The quiet narration, the plain captions, the slow build, the letters, the surprise meeting, the offer of help, all of it arrived in the same order every time, and the audience learned to feel the feelings the shape told them to feel. By dropping a talking towel into that machine, South Park asks a sneaky question. If the pattern still makes the moment feel heavy and serious even when the subject is a bath towel doing cartoon things, then how much of the real show's power came from real human pain, and how much came from the pattern doing its job no matter what was poured into it? The episode suggests that the shape is a kind of empty container, built to squeeze emotion out of an audience, and that it works almost the same whether it is filled with a suffering person or a stoned piece of laundry. There is also a sharp point hidden in the lie at the heart of the real genre. The people filmed for those shows were told they were making a calm documentary, and they did not know about the surprise meeting waiting at the end. So the rawness the audience watched was built on a trick. The subject thought they were doing one thing while the cameras were quietly setting up another. South Park, by copying the shape so faithfully, points right at that dishonesty. Everyone involved is following a script that pretends to be unplanned and real. The tears are real, perhaps, but the trap around them was carefully arranged for the benefit of viewers at home. The episode treats that arrangement as something worth laughing at and worth feeling uneasy about, because turning a person's private collapse into a surprise event for an audience is a strange thing to call documentary truth. This episode did not go down smoothly, and that is worth being honest about. Many reviewers found it weak. Some thought the addiction story was not very funny, and a number of them were bothered by the jokes aimed at the disabled campers, calling them mean for the sake of being mean. The episode also arrived right after a famous stretch of the show had been heavily censored for unrelated reasons, and a few writers pointed out the strange fact that cartoon cruelty toward disabled children was allowed on air while other images had been blocked, which raised uncomfortable questions about where the lines get drawn and why. So this is not one of the show's beloved polished classics. It is a rougher, more divided episode, but its central idea, the act of stuffing the most serious shape on television with the most ridiculous possible subject, is a genuinely smart piece of criticism, even when the jokes around it stumble. The plan to build an addiction story around Towley had actually been floating around the writers for years, saved from an earlier episode for the right moment, which shows the idea mattered to them even if the final result split the audience. The deeper unease the episode pokes at connects all the way back to where this story started. The opening idea was that real human events can be repackaged as exciting content for an audience, even something as terrible as war turned into a thrilling preview. This episode takes that same worry and aims it at the most personal kind of pain there is, the slow destruction of a person by addiction, the kind of pain that wrecks families from the inside. The real show took that pain and gave it a satisfying shape, a clear path from rock bottom to a hopeful goodbye at the treatment center, so that the audience could feel sad, and then feel uplifted, and then change the channel. There is a comfort in that, the comfort of watching real ruin wrapped in a story that promises it can be fixed. South Park looks at that comfort and finds something cold inside it. A person's worst hour becomes a product with a reliable emotional payoff, and the realness of the suffering gets smoothed over by the pattern until it is just another episode that follows the same beats as the last one. What stays in the mind, oddly, is how convincing the borrowed shape feels even wrapped around a towel. The serious captions, the grave voice, the slow march toward the surprise meeting, all of it carries a weight that has no business attaching itself to a talking bath towel, and yet it does. That is the quiet lesson buried under the gross jokes and the cartoon violence. The shape is so powerful that it can lend false weight to anything, which means it can lend false weight to real things too, dressing up ordinary footage as something deeper and more honest than it actually is. An audience trained by that pattern learns to trust the feeling the pattern gives them, even when the feeling is being manufactured on purpose. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The cameras in this story took one person's private fall and pressed it into a neat and repeatable shape for strangers to feel things about. The next move would be larger and louder. An entire group of people, a whole way of talking and dressing and behaving, would be packaged up and beamed out across the country, and their loud, aggressive style would spread from screen to street like something catching, jumping from one town to the next until it came rolling straight toward the quiet mountain home where this whole story story takes place. Section 5. An invasion of loud strangers. By 2010, two shows had turned one American state into a national punchline and a national obsession at the same time. One of them followed a group of young people who tanned themselves orange, gelled their hair into stiff shapes, drank heavily, and fought with each other almost constantly, all while living together in a beach house. The other followed a set of wealthy women from the same state as they argued, gossiped, and exploded at one another over dinner. Both shows came from New Jersey, and both turned loudness into a kind of fame. The people on them became huge stars by being as brash, as aggressive, and as shameless as possible. They yelled, they flipped tables, they threw drinks, they chased attention with a hunger that never seemed to switch off, and the country watched in enormous numbers, half laughing at them and half copying them, until the fist-pumping, table-flipping style of behavior had spread far beyond the state it came from. South Park watched this spread and built an episode around the idea that the spreading itself was the real story. The episode aired on October 13, 2010, 2 weeks after the towel episode in that same 14th season, and it was the 204th episode of the series. Trey Parker wrote it. It is called It Is a Jersey Thing, and its central idea is wonderfully simple and a little bit frightening. New Jersey, the episode imagines, is taking over the entire country, one state at a time, and the loud, aggressive way of acting that the show's made famous is moving across the land like a sickness, jumping from place to place. The next stop on the map is the quiet mountain town where the whole series lives. The episode opens close to home, with Sharon Marsh inviting a family from New Jersey over for dinner. The visiting woman is drawn straight from the wealthy arguing women of the one show, and she behaves exactly as those women behaved on camera. She is rude from the start, insulting Sharon and her friends. When Sharon calmly insults her right back, the woman does not laugh it off or push back with words. She erupts. She screams, she curses, and she flips the entire dinner table over in a wild rage, recreating one of the most famous explosions from the real program, where a woman did that very thing in a moment that people watched and shared endlessly. Then, just as quickly, her husband calms her down, and she goes right back to acting perfectly normal, as if the eruption had never happened. That small detail carries a lot of weight. The rage was not really rage. It was a performance, the kind of explosion the cameras rewarded with attention, switched on and off like a faucet. Soon more and more people from New Jersey move into town, and everyone begins to grow tired and frightened of them. The flood becomes an invasion, and at the center of the invasion is a creature the episode treats as the most monstrous of them all, a tiny, gross, animal-like thing based on the most famous star of the Beach House show. She is not drawn as a person. She is drawn as a small, scuttling monster, closer to a strange little goblin from a movie than a human being, and she terrorizes a local bar, lunging at people and demanding crude attention in a grunting, repeated little phrase. Turning the show's biggest star into a barely human creature is a harsh joke, and the show commits to it fully. The famous personality, stripped of its makeup and its editing, is shown as something feral and a little bit sad. The heart of the episode belongs to Kyle, and his story is where the deeper idea lives. As the invasion spreads, Kyle learns a family secret. His mother, Sheila, came from New Jersey, and she has spent her whole life hiding it, burying that part of herself so deeply that even her son never knew. This means Kyle himself is part Jersey. The aggressive, loud, table-flipping nature that the shows celebrate is not some foreign thing arriving from outside. It is already inside him, sleeping, passed down in his blood. And when the town is in its greatest danger, Kyle lets it out. He transforms into a full Jersey character, gold chains and slick style and snarling attitude, calling himself by a tough new name, and he uses all that unleashed aggression to drive the monster creature out of the bar. The frightening force the town was fighting turns out to be a force the town already carried within itself, only waiting for permission to come out. The ending tips fully into the kind of dark, shocking joke the show was never afraid of, as the townspeople build a barricade and make a desperate last stand against the Jersey horde, the way rebels do in an old stage musical. Their ammunition runs low and the invaders close in. At the final moment, they are saved from an unlikely direction. A group of terrorist pilots, led by the most wanted man in the world at the time, swoops in and crashes into the invading crowd, wiping them out. The town is rescued by the very enemies the country feared most, simply because those enemies hated the loud Jersey invaders even more. The most wanted man is then killed during a celebration held in his honor, a grim gag made stranger by the fact that the episode aired months before he was actually killed in real life. Cartman, looking at the transformed Kyle, tells him with rough affection that he is a monster, but at least he is their monster. The whole thing ends in chaos and bad taste, which is exactly where the show wanted it. The cleverest part of the episode is the way it treats the famous behavior as something catching. The real shows did not simply film people from one state. They took a loud, aggressive, shameless way of acting and beamed it into millions of homes, over and over, dressed up as fun and as as fame. And out in the real world, the behavior did spread. People started talking that way, dressing that way, treating loud public meltdowns as a normal and even admirable thing to do, because the screen had taught them that loudness gets noticed, and getting noticed is the prize. The episode turns this spread into a literal invasion crawling across the map, which makes the quiet truth easy to see. These shows do not just show people how others behave, they give viewers permission to behave the same way, and that permission travels. Kyle's secret heritage pushes the idea even further. By making the aggression something already buried inside an ordinary, decent character, the episode suggests that the loud and shameless self is not far away in some other kind of person. It is a thing most people carry, held down by manners and habit, and the shows work by loosening that hold. They make it look good, even glorious, to let the worst and loudest version of yourself off its leash. Kyle is a smart, thoughtful boy most of the time, and even he has the monster in him, ready to roar out the moment the situation allows it. The episode is gently warning that the behavior these programs sell is not foreign. It is the part of every person that the cameras flatter into coming forward. The way the show stages the contrast adds to the point. The town, before the invasion, is calm and ordinary and a little dull. The invaders are pure noise, pure motion, pure explosion. Setting the quiet against the loud makes the loud feel like a kind of pollution rolling in, filling a peaceful place with shouting and aggression. And because the show had spent years making the town feel like a real lived-in place, the invasion feels less like a joke about one state and more like a worry about what the country was turning into, one tanned, fist-pumping arrival at a time. What happened after the episode aired is almost too perfect, and it proves the point better than any joke could. The episode pulled a large audience, one of the most watched scripted programs on television the night it ran, and critics generally enjoyed it. But the most telling reaction came from the real stars the show had turned into monsters. They loved it. The biggest star, the one drawn as a scuttling little creature demanding crude attention, happily referenced her own monstrous portrayal in public, joking that she now wanted the very thing the cartoon creature kept grunting for. Her castmates posted about the episode with delight, thrilled to have appeared on South Park at all, even as gross caricatures of themselves. The wealthy table-flipping woman, after first claiming she had not seen it, later said she felt honored to be mocked. The people the episode tore apart treated being torn apart as a badge of pride. And that, in the end, is the deepest joke of all. On these shows, there is no such thing as bad attention. Being drawn as a feral goblin is still being drawn, still being noticed, still being famous. The hunger the episode was making fun of was so total that even a cruel parody fed it. This connects straight back through everything that came before. The world had been shown as a program powered by an audience that decides who matters. The empty stars that audience crowns had been shown teaching children what to want. The quick fix had been exposed as fragile, and real suffering had been shown squeezed into a tidy shape for viewers to feel things about. Now comes the next turn of the screw. The audience does not only watch and reward, it catches what it watches. The behavior on the screen leaks out into the streets and the homes and the dinner tables, spreading the loudest and most shameless way of being like something in the water. The machine does not simply hold up a mirror to how people act. It reaches back out and changes how people act, and the change moves outward, town by town, until even the quiet places are loud. What lingers afterward is that picture of Kyle, gold chains and snarl, the decent boy with the monster fully out, doing real good with a force that came from the worst part of himself. It is funny and it is uneasy at the same time, because it lands on a true thing. The capacity to be loud and aggressive and shameless lives in nearly everyone, kept quiet by choice and habit, and a steady diet of shows that celebrate letting it loose makes letting it loose feel less and less like a problem. The episode wraps that worry inside an invasion, a monster, a table flip, and a tasteless rescue from the sky, and the wild wrapping is what carries the worry past the laughter and lets it settle. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The town had survived a loud and visible invasion, a flood of strangers chasing attention out in the open for all to see. But a quieter and darker habit was about to take hold, and this time it would not arrive from outside. It would grow inside the grown-ups of the town themselves, a creeping craving to sit in the dark and watch real death and real crime, dressed up as gripping drama, a hunger so strong that the children would have to step in and try to break it. Section 6, when the grown-ups are the problem. By 2013, a whole corner of television had been built out of real death. Channels filled their nights with shows that took true murder cases, usually a husband killing a wife or a wife killing a husband, and turned them into glossy, dramatic stories. Actors played out the killings in dim lighting. A serious voice narrated every step toward the crime, lingering over the jealousy, the cheating, the slow build of hatred inside a marriage. The events were real, pulled from actual police files, but the way they were filmed made them feel less like news and more like something seedy and thrilling, a dark little drama to watch in bed at night. The shows were popular, and they kept coming because a large large audience had developed a steady hunger for watching real people destroy each other, dressed up in soft lighting and tense music. South Park looked at that hunger and built an episode around a clever flip. The episode aired on October 2nd, 2013, in the show's 17th season, and it was the 239th episode of the series. Trey Parker wrote and directed it, and the idea for it came from him, along with the comedian Bill Hader. It is called informative murder porn, which is the crude nickname the children in the episode give to these shows, and the flip at its heart is what makes it special. For its entire run, the series had worried, like everyone worries, about what television does to children. This time, the children are the ones doing the worrying, and the people rotting their brains on filthy, harmful content are the parents. The episode opens at the school, where a serious-minded boy gives a class report about the murder shows their parents have started watching. He explains what they are, how they reenact real killings between married couples, and he warns that filling adult heads with this stuff night after night might push the adults toward doing the same things themselves. The children listen with the grave concern of people learning that their loved ones are in danger. Then Stan goes home and finds his own parents, Randy and Sharon, glued to one of these shows, worked up and excited by it in a way that disturbs him deeply. The thing he was warned about is happening right in his own living room. The warning turns real fast. Cartman calls Stan with terrible news. A younger boy in town has lost his mother, killed by his own father, in a way that matches the very shows the parents had been binging. The boys arrive at the house as the mother is carried out and the father is taken away by police, loudly insisting he is innocent and blaming an imaginary intruder, which fools no one. A child has lost his mother, and the killing looks exactly like the dramas the grown-ups could not stop watching. The fear from the school report has stepped off the screen and into the neighborhood, so the children decide to act like the responsible adults the actual adults refuse to be. Kyle gathers the kids of the town for a meeting and lays out a plan. There is a phone app that can lock the dangerous channels behind a password, and the password is a question only a child would be able to answer. A question about the video game Minecraft, asking how a person tames a horse in that game. The grown-ups, who know nothing about the game, will be unable to unlock the channels, and the harmful shows will be cut off at the source. It is a perfect reversal of the usual order. For years, parents had set locks on televisions to protect children from grown-up content. Now the children set the locks, and the question they choose is one no out-of-touch adult could ever answer, because it lives entirely in the world of kids. The plan works at first, and the site of it is where a lot of the comedy lives. Randy, desperate to get back to his shows, shows up at Stan's door in the middle of the night with no clothes on, begging to know how a person tames a horse in the video game so he can unlock the television. When he cannot answer, he calls the cable company and learns that his own son has locked him out. The parents, furious and helpless, march down to the cable company to demand the lock be removed, and there they run into some of the strangest figures in the episode. The cable workers are openly cruel, taking obvious delight in being as unhelpful as possible, drawing out every request into a torture, and behaving toward one another in a creepy, off-putting way that makes the whole office feel diseased. The episode aims a real and bitter joke here at how miserable dealing with a cable company can be, how the people on the other side of the counter sometimes seem to enjoy your suffering. That side joke about powerful companies who hold a service hostage and smile while you squirm runs all through the back half of the episode. The parents, blocked from their shows, find a way around the lock. They hire a clever local boy named Corey, who teaches grown-ups how to play Minecraft for a small fee, so they can learn the answer to the password question. And then the second half of the episode delivers its own strange turn. The parents do not just learn enough of the game to unlock the television, they fall completely under the game's spell. Adults who never cared about video games become obsessed, spending hours inside it, and the obsession spills into the real world. They start punching trees in their own backyards, the way the game has them do, and building blocky walls and fortresses in and around the public buildings of the town. The grown-ups, freed from one screen, simply fall headfirst into another, swapping one mindless habit for a different mindless habit without a pause in between. The boys track down Corey and learn that if they truly want to protect their families, they have to go after the cable company itself. They return and confront the miserable workers again, and the company, learning how badly it would upset the parents to lose their murder shows, decides to drop those channels entirely out of pure spite. With the dark shows finally gone for good, the parents are denied their fix one last time, and here the episode lands its final telling joke. Randy and Sharon, robbed of their murder dramas, turn to the video game they have grown obsessed with, and inside the game, they use their little blocky characters to kill each other over and over, drawing the exact same dark thrill from the make-believe murder that they once drew from the television. The appetite never went away. The shows were only one way to feed it. Take the shows away, and the hunger simply crawls toward the next thing that can satisfy it. The sharpest moment in the whole episode is a short speech from Randy near the start, when Stan first tries to block his shows. Randy is offended, and he defends himself. He insists that watching married people kill each other on television could never make him go out and do such a thing in real life, that the very idea is ridiculous. And then, without noticing what he is doing, he keeps talking, and he begins to explain in calm detail exactly how he would murder his wife and get away with it, how he would deal with the evidence, why hiring someone else would be a mistake, how much thought he has already put into the whole plan. He argues that the shows have no effect on him, while proving, in the same breath, that the shows have soaked all the way into his thinking. The denial and the evidence sit side by side in one speech, and he cannot see the gap between them. That is the episode in miniature. The people most certain that the content is harmless are the ones most deeply changed by it. The deeper idea here connects to a worry that has been building since the very beginning of this story. Long ago, the show imagined real war turned into an exciting preview to keep an audience watching. Later, it showed real addiction squeezed into a comforting shape for viewers to feel things about. This episode points at the same wound from another angle. There is an appetite in the audience for real human darkness, real killing, real betrayal, served up as entertainment, and a whole branch of television exists to feed that appetite night after night. The episode argues that the appetite is the true engine of the whole thing. The shows are simply the current way of feeding it. The content can be swapped out, traded for a video game where blocky people kill each other, and the hunger keeps right on eating. What the audience craves is the thrill of watching destruction at a safe distance, and an entire industry has organized itself to deliver that thrill on a schedule. The flip at the center, with children policing their parents, says something quietly cutting too. Across the whole series, and across this entire story, the grown-ups have been the careless one, the easily fooled one, the ones who fall for trends and crown empty stars and believe in quick fixes. This episode makes that plain by handing the children the job of responsible adults. The kids see the danger clearly, organize a meeting, build a sensible plan, and try to protect the people who are supposed to be protecting them. The actual adults, meanwhile, throw tantrums, show up naked at doors, get tricked by a younger child, and slide from one harmful obsession straight into another. The audience the machine feeds is not made up of foolish children easily led astray. It is made up of grown adults who should know better and do not, and who defend their worst habits with confidence, right up until those habits curdle into something terrible. The way the show stages all this keeps the same steady, almost calm surface that lets the hard ideas slip through. A boy losing his mother to murder is handled quickly and soberly. A real horror sitting in the middle of a silly story about cable locks and video games. The grown-ups punching trees in their yards is filmed as ordinary suburban behavior, treated as if it were perfectly normal, which is what makes it funny and a little sad. Near the end, the show even shifts its drawing style to show the parents inside the blocky world of the game, a small touch that makes their escape into make-believe feel complete. The episode never raises its voice. It lets the gap between how calm everything looks and how dark the appetite underneath it is do the work. What lingers afterward is that picture of the parents in their backyard, swinging at trees, building little forts, then sitting down to kill each other in a game for the same private thrill they used to get from the television. It is funny, and it is bleak, because it lands on something true. A craving does not vanish when one source dries up. It waits, and it finds another door. The episode wraps that truth inside cable company creeps, and naked midnight visits, and a video game obsession, and the wrapping is what carries it past the laughter, and lets it settle into something uneasy. By turning the worried children into the parents, and the careless parents into the children, the episode also makes its biggest point about the whole machine. The grown audience is not a victim of bad television done to it from outside. The grown audience is the reason the bad television exists. The hunger comes first. The shows are built to feed it, and the shows it is fed could be anything at all, as long as they keep the dark thrill coming. Strip away the murder dramas and the appetite reaches for a children's building game and turns even that into a place to act out killing. The problem was never only the screen. The problem was the thing inside the watcher that the screen learned to plead. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. One whole kind of show then made its money by squeezing breathless drama out of real death and real betrayal. But there was an opposite problem waiting for the camera, a problem these shows almost never admitted out loud. What happens when nothing dramatic happens at all? What does a thrilling reality show do when the day it filmed turns out to be completely, crushingly boring? South Park would answer that question by sending the boys off on the dullest afternoon imaginable, and then filming every dull second of it as if it were a desperate, white-knuckle fight for their very lives. Section 7, a thrilling story about nothing at all. By 2012, one popular kind of show had built itself entirely out of survival. Real people who had once come close to death would sit and tell their stories, and the show would act those stories out with dramatic reenactments, while a deep, serious voice narrated every terrifying turn. A hiker lost in the desert, a swimmer caught in a current, a driver stranded in the snow. The narration was breathless and grave, the music tense, and every small choice the survivor made was treated as a life-or-death decision that the audience held its breath over. These shows were gripping, and they were popular because there is something deeply satisfying about watching an ordinary person face death and live. The thing the shows could never quite admit, was that the gripping feeling did not come from the events themselves. It came from the way the events were filmed. The narration and the music and the slow dramatic build could squeeze tension out of almost anything, as long as the shape was applied correctly. South Park decided to prove that point by taking the shape and pointing it at the most boring afternoon imaginable. The episode aired on April 18, 2012, in the show's 16th season, and it was the 229th episode of the series. Trey Parker wrote and directed it. It carries the long, complaining title "I Should Have Never Gone Ziplining," and the whole thing is built as a faithful copy of the famous survival show, complete with the genuine article's own deep-voiced narrator, who was actually hired to narrate this cartoon the same way he narrated the real program. From the first second, the borrowed shape is locked in. The only joke, and it turns out to be a rich one, is that nothing dangerous ever actually happens. The episode opens exactly like a survival show should. The boys are shown screaming for help in apparent agony, while the grave narrator describes the misfortune that has befallen them. The tone promises a harrowing tale of endurance against the odds. Then the show pulls back to reveal the truth. It is simply the last day of spring break, and the four boys are trying to decide what to do with their final free afternoon. Kyle suggests they all go ziplining up in the mountains, the activity where a person clips onto a cable and slides between high platforms over the trees. Everyone agrees, their argument settled, and off they go, with the dramatic narration following them as if they were marching towards certain doom. The gap between the breathless voice and the harmless plan is the engine of the entire episode, and the show runs that engine for the full half hour. What follows is the most ordinary, tedious experience a person could have, filmed as if it were a desperate fight for life. The boys get dropped off and discover that ziplining is mostly waiting. There are long safety briefings. There is a safety video. There is a shuttle they have to take to reach the actual ziplining spot, and the travel eats up huge stretches of time. When they finally do the thing itself, it is slow and underwhelming. And worst of all, they are trapped with other tourists, chatty adults who will not stop talking, who drag every dull story out far longer than it needs to go. A running joke threads through the whole episode, where the tourists keep promising to make a long story short and then launching into stories that somehow get even longer, until the promise becomes a kind of torture. The boredom is total, and the survival show narration treats every minute of it with the same heavy, life-or-death seriousness, as if surviving a slow shuttle ride and a boring tour were a genuine test of human endurance. The episode then does something bold with its own picture. It stops being a cartoon. Partway through, the show switches to live action, with real grown men hired to play the boys during the dramatic reenactment scene, exactly the way the real survival show uses paid actors to act out the survivors' stories. The animated versions of the boys still appear for the bits where they speak to the camera about what they went through, but the supposed real events are acted out by adults in a real place, with a real boat and real water. This copies the genuine show very closely, since those programs always replace the actual survivors with actors for the dramatic parts. The filming was done in a real harbor near the ocean, even though the story is set in the mountains of Colorado, so palm trees and buildings are visible in the background where snowy peaks should be, a small slip that makes the fakeness even funnier. The boat the boys end up on belong, in real life, to the family of the show's own creator, a tiny behind-the-scenes detail that fits the homemade, knowing feel of the whole stunt. As the dull afternoon drags on, the survival show shape demands danger, so the episode invents danger out of pure boredom and discomfort. The boys face an escalating series of miseries that get treated as deadly threats. There is sickness, there are gross bodily problems, the kind that come from too much bad food and too much waiting. There are beavers. There is the looming threat of simply dying from how boring everything is. By the end, the boys have caught an illness from the ordeal, and the situation is painted as a brush with death, even though the only real enemy was tedium. Kenny, true to the show's oldest running joke, dies, and the way he dies is that he is bored to death on a slow boat, his life drained away by sheer dullness. The survival show treatment turns nothing into everything, inflating an afternoon of waiting around into a tale of suffering and loss. At the lowest point, the boys are rescued, arriving by way of an absurd helicopter entrance from one of the show's most ridiculous recurring characters, a final gag that punctures any last bit of drama. The episode saves a small twist for the end that adds a sour, knowing note. It turns out the whole disaster happened because of Stan. He had agreed to the ziplining trip not because he wanted to do it, but because he had been promised a free music player, a small popular gadget, as a reward for going. He sold his friends into a day of misery for a piece of free electronics. In a moment moment built to look like heartfelt grief, Stan tearfully reflects on Kenny dying, and then reveals that the truly hard part for him is that he cannot even trade the free gadget in anywhere. The fake emotion of the survival show, the noble survivor looking back on the friend he lost, gets hijacked by petty greed, and the joke lands on how these dramatic stories often dress up very small and selfish things in very large and noble feelings. The cleverest idea in the episode lives in that live-action switch and in the borrowed narration. The real survival shows always insisted they were showing true stories, real events that really happened to real people, and yet the parts the audience actually watched, the gripping dramatic scenes, were performed by actors, staged in convenient locations, shaped and cut and scored to wring out the most tension possible. The truth was performed. South Park makes this impossible to miss by hiring real adults to play cartoon children acting out a fake survival story in a fake location. The seams are left showing on purpose. The point being made is that the survival show feeling, that breathless sense of life and death, is something built in an editing room, not something captured from reality. Apply the narration, hire the actors, add the music, and a boring afternoon becomes an epic of endurance. Strip those things away, and all that is left is 4 kids who were bored on the last day of spring break. There is an even sharper, quieter idea buried in the live-action choice. When the real adult actor playing Cartman delivers Cartman's usual cruel, nasty lines, but in a normal human voice with no cartoon softness, the lines land very differently. They become uncomfortable in a way they never are when a round little cartoon child says them. The show, perhaps without fully announcing it, demonstrates something about itself in that moment. The cartoon frame is part of what lets the audience laugh at things that would be ugly coming from a real person. Take away the drawing, put the words in a real mouth, and the cruelty stops being funny and starts being unsettling. It is a small accidental lesson about how the form of a thing changes what the audience is willing to accept, which sits right alongside the episode's bigger point about how the survival show form changes how an audience feels. This episode did not land cleanly with everyone, and that is worth being honest about. It split the audience down the middle. Some people found it brilliant, especially anyone who had ever suffered through a boring guided tour and recognized the exact misery the show was capturing. Others found it dull and one note, a single joke stretched too thin, and the long live-action ending in particular divided viewers, with some loving how strange it was, and others feeling it dragged on past the point of fun. The reviews were mixed, and the episode sits somewhere in the middle of the show's long history, rather than among its beloved classics. But the idea inside it, the act of pointing the most dramatic shape on television at the least dramatic events possible, is a genuinely smart piece of criticism, even for the people who did not laugh much while watching it. The deeper idea here pairs perfectly with the kind of show that came just before it in this story. One branch of reality television squeezed thrilling drama out of real death and real betrayal, taking genuine horror and dressing it up to feed an audience hungry for darkness. This episode shows the opposite end of the same trick. When there is no real drama at all, when the day is empty and dull and nothing is at stake, the format simply manufactures the drama anyway. The narration insists there is danger. The music insists there is tension. The reenactment insists there was a desperate fight for survival. And the audience, trained by years of these shows, feels the danger and the tension and the desperation, even though the only real event was a long wait for a shuttle. Put the two kinds of shows side by side, the one about real death and the one about total boredom, and the lesson becomes clear. The drama was never coming from the events. The drama was always being built by the shape, poured over whatever happened to be in front of the camera, because the audience came to feel something and the show existed to make sure they did. This says something a little unsettling about what these shows train an audience to expect. After enough survival stories, after enough breathless narration laid over ordinary moments, a person starts to expect every story to have stakes, every choice to be dramatic, every small event to mean something large. Real life rarely cooperates. Most afternoons are like the ziplining trip, full of waiting and small talk and minor annoyances that add up to nothing in particular. The shows quietly teach the audience to find that ordinary reality disappointing, to crave the manufactured tension instead, to feel that an afternoon without a brush with death was somehow a failure. The episode pokes at that craving by giving the audience the manufactured tension wrapped around an afternoon so empty that the hollowness of the trick becomes visible. The feeling is real. The thing producing the feeling is fake. And once a person sees the gap between those two, the survival show is harder to take seriously ever again. The way the show stages the whole thing keeps its usual steady hand. The boredom is filmed patiently. The dull tour allowed to actually feel dull, so that the breathless narration laid over it grows more and more absurd the longer it continues. The live action scenes are played mostly straight, which makes them stranger than if they had been goofy. The gross perils and the beavers and the boredom death are all treated with the same grave seriousness the real show gave to genuine survival, and the contrast contrast between the serious treatment and the silly content is where the comedy keeps coming from. The episode trusts the audience to notice the gap on its own, which is part of why some viewers found it too slow. It is a joke that only fully lands once a person sees what is being made fun of. What lingers afterward is the strange image of grown men in a real boat in a real harbor, pretending to be cartoon children fighting for their lives against nothing, while a famous serious voice narrates their imaginary suffering. It is funny and a little eerie, because underneath the silliness sits a true and slightly cold idea about how feelings get manufactured. The episode wraps that idea in palm trees standing in for mountains, a free gadget that cannot be traded in, and a boy bored to death on a slow boat, and the strange wrapping is what carries the idea past the laughter and lets it sit. A person can be made to feel a desperate fight for survival over an afternoon where the worst thing that happened was a long wait. The feeling proves nothing about the events. It only proves the power of the shape. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. These shows, then, could take an empty afternoon and dress it up as a desperate struggle, manufacturing huge feelings out of nothing at all. But another kind of show made an even bolder claim, one aimed not at events, but at the person sitting on the couch. It promised that the ordinary viewer at home was the thing that needed fixing, that their clothes and their hair and their whole way of moving through the world were a problem that an expert could solve. And the moment that idea drifted into the quiet mountain town, every grown man in it caught the same sudden urge at once, an urge to tear down everything about himself and build a shinier version back up. Section 8, the show that fixes you. By 2003, a new makeover show had become a sudden sensation. The idea was simple. 5 stylish gay men, known together as the Fab Five, would descend on one ordinary straight man whose life was a mess of bad clothes, bad grooming, and a messy home, and they would transform him. They cut his hair, threw out his ugly shirts, taught him to cook and decorate and carry himself with more polish. And by the end of the episode, the slob had become a handsome, well-kept new man, often to the tears and delight of the woman in his life. The show was warm and funny and wildly popular, and it kicked off a whole cultural moment. Suddenly, the newspapers were full of a new word, metrosexual, which described a straight man who took great care with his looks, his clothes, and his grooming, the way the show taught. Ordinary men everywhere started paying attention to products and styles they had never thought about before, because the show had told them, gently but clearly, that the natural everyday man was a problem in need of fixing. South Park answered the makeover craze with an episode that aired on October 22nd, 2003 in the show's 7th season. It was the 104th episode of the series, and Trey Parker wrote it. It is called South Park is Gay, and it even used the real theme song from the actual makeover show to lock the parody in place. The episode takes the show's quiet message that the regular man needs to be improved and imagines what happens when an entire town swallows that message whole and decides to remake itself all at once. The craze hits South Park like a wave. The men and boys of the town all become metrosexuals overnight, fussing over their hair, buying trendy clothes, grooming themselves with great care, and treating their own appearance as the most important thing in their lives. Being polished and stylish becomes the only acceptable way to be, and everyone rushes to conform. Everyone, that is, except Kyle. Kyle has no interest in the fad. He does not want to change how he dresses or how he acts, and his refusal turns him into an outcast. He gets beaten up at school by a gang of newly fashionable boys, and worse, his own best friends abandon him. Stan, Cartman, and Kenny drop him because his stubborn refusal to join in makes them look less stylish, less with it to the other kids. The boy who will not chase the trend is punished for it, left alone while everyone else hurries to become the same shiny new version of themselves. The grown men of the town change too, and at first the women are pleased. Their husbands are suddenly cleaner, better dressed, more willing to talk and share their feelings, and the women enjoy the improvement. But the good feeling does not last. The more the men chase the trend, the more they fall in love with themselves. They become self-absorbed, more interested in their own looks and styles than in anyone around them, until the women find themselves living with vain, fussy strangers who care more about their hair than about their families. The promised improvement curdles. What looked like the men getting better turns out to be the men disappearing into themselves, and the people who love them are left worse off than before. Two characters object to the fad from the start, and their reason adds another layer. Mr. Garrison and Mr. Slave, the town's gay couple, dislike the craze because they feel it steals something that belonged to them. The careful grooming and the stylish flair had been part of a real way of living for real gay men, and watching every straight man in town put it on like a costume, wear it as a passing trend, and then no doubt drop it later, strikes them as a kind of theft. A real group's actual life had been turned into a fad for everyone else to try on and discard. Their anger is the anger of people watching something genuine get flattened into a shallow trend by a popular show. The objections build until Kyle, Mr. Garrison, and Mr. Slave brave, decide the only way to stop the madness is to go to the source. They travel to New York City with the goal of killing the Fab Five, the hosts of the makeover show, to end the craze for good. Their plan fails, so instead they confront the five men and demand that they stop the show, that they stop turning every straight man into a fussy copy of themselves. The hosts refuse, and Mr. Garrison, baffled, demands to know how gay men could betray their own community this way, why they would hand their culture out to everyone and ruin what made it special. As he says it, the answer dawns on him. The only reason these five would do such a thing is if they were not actually gay men at all. What happens next is the turn that made the episode famous. The five hosts go grave and still, and then their human bodies burst open to reveal that they are not human at all. They are an ancient underground race called the Crab People, strange crab-like creatures who chant their own name over and over. The Crab People explain their plan. They are too weak to ever defeat humanity in a straight fight, so they have chosen a sneakier path. By turning all the men of the world into vain, self-absorbed, fussy metrosexuals, they can weaken the entire human race from the inside, soften it, distract it, until the Crab People can simply walk in and take over. The makeover show was their weapon. The whole craze of self-improvement was a trick to make people pliable and harmless. The Crab People capture Kyle and the two men and begin turning them into Crab People too. The Crab People then arrange for the makeover show to give a transformation to the president himself, with the country's leader sitting in for his own polishing. And while that is happening, the rescue arrives from an unexpected direction. The women of South Park, completely fed up with their vain and useless husbands, storm the studio and beat the Fab Five to death. They explain, standing over the bodies, that what truly makes a man attractive is his masculinity, his ordinary rough manliness, even when he is gross and unpolished, and that the makeover trend had stripped that away and left behind something worse. In killing the hosts, the women accidentally reveal the Crab People underneath, exposing the whole plot. The producers, stunned to learn the hosts were never human, note that the Crab People had tried a scheme like this once before with an old television show, a quick joke that ties the creatures to an earlier piece of pop culture. And then the producers make their decision about what comes next. With the makeover craze finished, they announce they will simply bring back an older trend, a Latin fad, and the people of South Park instantly drop everything and rush to chase the new trend exactly as slavishly as they chased the last one. That ending carries one of the episode's sharpest ideas. The specific trend never really mattered. The town did not love being metrosexual for any deep reason. They loved having a trend to chase, a new self to rush toward, an instruction from the screen about who they were supposed to become this season. The moment one craze ends, another slides into its place, and the people throw themselves at it just as eagerly, never pausing to ask why they keep remaking themselves at the command of a television show. The makeover genre had taught them that the natural self is never good enough, that improvement is always needed, that a fix is always for sale. And once a person believes that, the particular fix can be swapped out endlessly. There is always a new trend, a new product, a new better version waiting, and the chase never ends because it was never meant to end. A small subplot drives the hollowness home. At one point, the metrosexual men of the town decide to hold a pride parade to celebrate their new way of life, copying the real parades that real gay communities hold. The metro parade is a disaster. When one of the floats breaks down, nobody will step up to fix it because none of the men are willing to risk breaking a fingernail or getting their hands dirty. The joke cuts deep. A real community contains all kinds of people, including ones who can fix an engine, while the metrosexual trend produced only a crowd of men too precious and self-absorbed to be useful. The fad had given them the surface of a culture with none of its substance. They had bought the look and skipped the light. The way the show stages all this keeps its steady hand right up until the wild reveal. The craze sweeps the town in a calm, matter-of-fact way, treated as if a whole population suddenly remaking itself were perfectly normal. Kyle's loneliness is played quietly and seriously, the real cost of refusing to follow the herd. And then the Crab People burst out and the episode tips into pure cartoon madness, a sudden jolt of strangeness that has delighted and confused viewers ever since. The contrast between the ordinary opening and the bizarre monster reveal is part of what people remember. This episode has an unusual place in the show's own history, and it is worth being honest about. The people who made South Park have said for years that they consider it one of their worst episodes. They were never happy with the Crab People twist. They had thrown out an earlier version of the story, then spent hours in the writing room trying to come up with a strong ending, and the best they could land on was the crab creatures bursting out of the hosts. One of the show's top producers flatly called the idea stupid, and yet, in one of the strange ironies of television, the thing the creators thought was their weakest invention became one of the show's most beloved monsters. The Crab People kept coming back in later episodes, chanting their name, a lasting piece of the show's world, born from an ending its own makers disliked. A bad idea by their their own judgment gave them something fans treasured for years. The deeper idea underneath the silliness connects to everything that came before in this story. The world had been shown as a program powered by an audience. The empty stars that audience crowns had been shown teaching people what to want. The quick fix for a broken child had been exposed as fragile. Real suffering had been squeezed into shapes for viewers to consume. A loud way of behaving had spread like a sickness, and the format had proven it could manufacture drama out of anything or nothing. Now comes a turn that points the lens directly at the person watching. The makeover show does not just entertain the viewer. It tells the viewer that they are the problem. Their clothes are wrong, their hair is wrong, their home and their manners and their whole ordinary way of being are a project that needs fixing, and the show is there to sell the fix. The episode imagines a town that fully believes this, and the result is a population that hands itself over to be remade again and again, chasing one trend after another, never good enough in its own eyes, always rushing toward the next better self the screen describes. There is something almost frightening in how the crab people plan works. They do not conquer through force. They conquer by convincing people to weaken themselves, to become vain and distracted and obsessed with their own surfaces, until they are too soft and self-absorbed to resist anything. The makeover trend, in the episode's wild logic, is a tool for making people pliable. That is a heavy charge dressed up in crab costumes, but the worry underneath it is real. A culture that constantly tells people they need improving, that keeps them forever chasing the next style and the next product and the next version of themselves, is a culture of people too busy fixing their own surfaces to notice much else. The endless self-improvement the makeover show sells does not produce a town of better people. It produces a town of distracted followers, ready to chase whatever the screen points at next. What lingers afterward is the final image of Kyle. After everything, his friends accept him back at school, but the moment he complains that they had abandoned him for refusing the trend, they call him a name and run off to play football, and after a pause, he reluctantly followed. The boy who was right, who saw the hollowness of the craze and refused to join it, ends up alone in his rightness, and then quietly gives in just enough to rejoin the group. It echoes the earlier story of the one sensible girl pushed out for refusing an empty fad. Being right about the emptiness of a trend does not make a person popular. It makes them lonely, and the pull to rejoin the herd, even a herd you know is foolish, is strong. The episode wraps that small, sad truth inside crab monsters, and a failed parade, and a presidential makeover, and the wild wrapping carries it past the laughter and lets it settle. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The makeover show then told the person at home that they were the thing that needed fixing, and sold them an endless line of trends to chase, so the fixing would never be finished. But one show would sink lower than any of these, low enough to drag a hard question right out into the open. The question was no longer about what was wrong with the shows themselves. It was about what was wrong with the millions of people who kept choosing to watch them, and whether the real thing pulling everything down had been sitting quietly on the couch the entire time. Section 9. The lowest the bar can go by 2012. A new reality show had arrived that many people pointed to as the lowest television had ever sunk. It followed a small girl from rural Georgia and her family as they lived their loud, messy, unembarrassed lives on camera. The little girl had first appeared on a show about child beauty pageants, and she had proven so colorful and quotable that the network gave her family their own program. The show celebrated everything that polite society usually hides. It lingered over junk food and belching and bad manners and a way of living that most channels would have been too ashamed to put on the air, and the audience loved it. The show pulled huge numbers, became a national talking point, and turned a child into a star for being exactly the kind of thing television was once supposed to rise above. To a lot of people, the popularity of that show was not just bad taste. It felt like proof that something in the culture had collapsed, that the standards everyone used to share had quietly dropped through the floor. South Park looked at that collapse and built its sharpest, most direct episode about reality television around it. The episode aired on October 3rd, 2012, in the show's 16th season, and it was the 232nd episode of the series. Trey Parker wrote and directed it, and it would go on to win the show its biggest honor, the top award for an animated program, which is a strange and fitting prize for an episode about how far standards have fallen. It is called Raising the Bar, and its whole subject is the bar itself, the invisible line that marks how low a society is willing to go before it feels ashamed. The episode argues, more plainly than any before it, that the line has dropped about as far as it can, and it names the reason why. The story has two threads running side by side. The first follows Cartman. While out shopping, Cartman and Kyle get into an argument about Cartman's weight. Cartman insists he is not really fat, pointing to the much larger people riding around the store on motorized scooters as proof that he is nothing like them. Kyle warns him that those people are exactly what Cartman is becoming. Cartman thinks it over, and then he does something that turns Kyle's warning inside out. He accepts that he is fat, and rather than feeling any shame about it, he decides to gain even more weight on purpose, enough that his insurance company will be forced to buy him his own motorized scooter. He starts riding around town, treating the scooter as his right, behaving like an entitled jerk, daring anyone to make him feel bad about it. The shame that was supposed to push him to change has simply evaporated. He has discovered that if he refuses to feel ashamed, nobody can make him, and that refusal becomes a kind of power. Kyle watches this and grows uneasy. He sees the entitled scooter riders, he sees Cartman gleefully joining them, and he sees the little girl's reality show becoming one of the biggest things on television, and he starts to feel that something has gone badly wrong with the world. Stan helps put it into words. He explains to Kyle that the bar, the shared sense of how low people are willing to go, has been lowered so far that nobody feels shame about anything anymore. That collapse of shame is the reason a show built on belching and junk food and bad behavior can become a smash hit. The standards that once would have kept such a thing off the air are gone, and with them gone, the lowest content rises straight to the top. The clearest explanation of how this happens comes from Token, one of the boys, in a short speech that sits at the heart of the episode. Token tells Kyle that when he first saw an episode of the little girl's reality show, he was disgusted by it, genuinely repulsed. But then he noticed something. He saw that the show aired on a channel that had once been devoted to education, a channel whose very name was about learning. And seeing that even a channel built for learning was now perfectly happy to broadcast something so low, Token decided that if they were fine with it, he could be fine with it too. His disgust simply gave up. That little speech is the engine of the whole collapse laid bare. The bar does not drop all at once by some grand decision. It drops one person at a time, each one looking around, seeing that everyone else has stopped caring, and quietly deciding to stop caring as well. Token's surrender is everyone's surrender. The standard falls because each individual lets go of it the moment they notice their neighbor already has. Cartman's thread then collides with the little girl's. Cartman learns that there is a reality show about his own life, and that it has already aired. He is thrilled until he discovers that his show was crushed in the ratings, beaten by a wide margin by the little girl's program. This sends him into a jealous rage. He cannot stand being outshined by her, cannot bear that her brand of shamelessness drew a bigger crowd than his, so he challenges her to a contest. The two of them, a fat boy and a fat little girl, are set to wrestle each other in a pool of spaghetti, the cheap buttery noodles the girl's family lives on, at a gathering about the dangers of obesity held on the lawn of the White House and hosted by the First Lady, who in real life had been campaigning against childhood obesity. The image says everything. Two children, each one a symbol of shamelessness, fighting in a pool of junk food at an event meant to address the very problem they embody, while the country watches and a famous leader looks on. It is a race to the bottom, staged as a sporting event. Two competitors fighting, not to be the best, but to be the most watched, the most low, the biggest spectacle. The little girl herself is shown living a deeply unhealthy life, fed buttery noodles and energy drinks by a mother who treats this as perfectly normal. At one point, the episode pushes the joke to a wild extreme involving a pig's heart, the kind of absurd touch the show loves, which, oddly enough, would echo a real medical breakthrough years later. Through all of it, the episode never lets the audience forget that this is a small child whose unhealthy, unguarded life has been packaged up and sold as entertainment, and that millions of people chose to make it a hit. While all this plays out, the second thread of the episode runs through the famous film director James Cameron. Taking the phrase about raising the bar completely literally, Cameron sets out on a deep-sea expedition to find the actual bar at the bottom of the ocean and physically raise it back up. His crew keeps trying to explain to him that the bar is only a figure of speech, a way of talking about standards, not a real object resting on the seafloor. Cameron ignores them. He dives down into the deepest part of the ocean, an act based on a real record-setting dive the director had truly made earlier that same year, and he searches the dark until he finds the bar and hauls it upward with his equipment. The episode treats Cameron gently and with real fondness, painting him as a bold artist, an explorer who actually cares about lifting standards back up, the one figure willing to do the hard, lonely work while everyone around him insists it cannot be done and is only a metaphor anyway. After he raises the bar, he cheerfully announces he is off to make another big movie, a small joke about his real next project. That second thread carries the hope, such as it is. In a world where everyone has surrendered their standards, where each person has decided to stop caring because their neighbor stopped caring, Cameron is the lone voice insisting that the bar is real, that it can be found, and that it can be lifted. The crew telling him it is only a metaphor stands in for everyone who has given up, everyone who believes nothing can be done. Cameron, stubborn and a little ridiculous, refuses to accept that. The episode lets him win his strange quest, which suggests a small, flickering belief that standards can be raised again, even if it takes someone willing to look foolish and dive to the bottom of the sea alone to do it. The deeper idea here is the one the whole story has been building toward from its very first moments. Long ago, the show imagined the world itself as a reality program powered entirely by an audience whose attention was the only thing that kept the whole machine running. Every episode since has examined a different trick the machine plays, a different way it manipulates or manufactures or spreads or sells. But raising the bar stops circling the question and answers it outright. The shows are not really the problem. The producers chasing ratings are not really the problem. The problem is the audience. The bar drops because millions of people keep choosing the lowest thing on offer, keep rewarding shamelessness with their attention, keep surrendering their own standards the moment they notice everyone around them has done the same. A network can only put a thing on the air. It takes a huge crowd of willing viewers to make that thing a hit, and the crowd kept saying yes. The little girl's show was not forced on anyone. People chose it in enormous numbers, and the choosing is what dragged the bar down. The episode makes this point without ever fully letting the viewer off the hook, and that is part of its power. It would have been easy to spend the whole half hour simply mocking the little girl and her family, pointing and laughing at an easy target. The episode does some of that, and the meanness toward a real child is a fair thing to feel uneasy about. But the real aim sits higher up the chain. The show turns the lens around and asks why the program existed at all, why it thrived, who made it a sensation, and the answer it lands on is the people watching at home. The disgust everyone felt at the show, the disgust Token described before he surrendered it, was never enough to keep them from tuning in. They watched anyway. They made it number one, and in doing so, they lowered the bar with their own hands, one click of the remote at a time. There is a real-world tale to this episode that proves its point almost too neatly. The way the show even came to exist is telling. The people making South Park barely knew who the little girl was until they got word that her show's big finale had beaten their own season premiere in the ratings, the two having aired against each other. The fact that a program built on belching and junk food had outdrawn them was itself the spark for the whole episode, a real-life moment of watching the bar drop and feeling it personally. And the real mother of the real family later spoke about the episode and said she did not like how they were shown, calling the portrayal trashy. So the parody landed on living people who felt it sting, the same uncomfortable truth that has shadowed several of these episodes. The show was making a fair and important point about a culture in decline, and it was aiming that point at a real child and a real family who had their own feelings about being used as the symbol of everything wrong with television. The way the episode is put together holds its two threads in a clever balance. The collapse of standards is shown at ground level through Cartman and the little girl, all junk food and entitlement and shamelessness, while the lonely fight to raise standards plays out far below the ocean through Cameron. The contrast between the bottom of the sea, where the real bar sits waiting to be lifted, and the bottom of the culture, where everyone has stopped caring, gives the episode its shape. The calm, almost gentle tone the show always uses lets the hard idea slip through. Nobody on screen shouts that the bar has fallen. They simply live in a world where it already has, and they treat that fallen world as normal, which is exactly what makes the point land. Winning the show's top award for this particular episode adds a final layer of irony that fits perfectly. The most cutting story the show ever told about lowered standards, about an audience dragging the culture down by rewarding the lowest thing on offer, was handed the highest honor its medium gives. There is something almost too perfect in that, a small proof that the show had said something true enough and sharp enough to be recognized even by the same industry it was criticizing. What lingers afterward is Token's quiet surrender, the moment a disgusted boy looks around, sees that everyone else has stopped caring, and decides to stop caring too. That is the whole collapse in a single small choice, repeated millions of times across millions of living rooms. The bar does not fall because of villains or networks or producers. It falls because ordinary people, one by one, let go of the standard they were holding the instant they noticed their neighbor has let go of theirs. The episode wraps that hard truth inside spaghetti wrestling and a deep sea dive and a pig's heart, and the wild rapping carries it past the laughter and lets it settle into something that feels less like a joke and more like a warning. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The show had finally said it out loud. It had named the problem and pointed straight at the audience, at the crowd, at the millions of people whose choices dragged everything down. But there was one more move left, and it was the quietest and most personal of them all. The show would stop talking about the crowd entirely. It would zoom all the way in, past the millions and the ratings and the networks, down to a single ordinary girl sitting alone in her room, and it would show, with a tenderness it rarely allowed itself, exactly what all of this does to one person who only wanted to be able to like what she saw when she looked in the mirror. Section 10. The Girl Who Gave Up. By 2013, the most famous reality star in the world was no longer the hotel heiress from a decade earlier. A new figure had taken that place, a woman whose entire family lived lived their lives on camera, whose every move was filmed and followed and turned into a show, and who had become one of the most photographed people on the planet despite having no clear talent or job beyond being looked at. She was the new version of the old idea, fame built on fame, a person famous for being famous, 10 years on from the last one. And there was one thing about her image that mattered more than any other. Almost every picture of her that the public ever saw had been carefully changed. Her photos were smoothed and reshaped and perfected before they reached a magazine cover or a billboard, polished into something flawless that no real human face has ever actually looked like. Millions of girls grew up studying those perfect images, comparing their own ordinary faces in the mirror to a standard that was never real to begin with. South Park ended its 17th season with an episode about exactly that, and it turned out to be one of the quietest and saddest things the show ever made. The episode aired on December 11th, 2013, and it was the 247th episode of the series, the final one of that whole season. Trey Parker wrote and directed it. It is called The Hobbit, a strange title that comes from a cruel joke the children make, and while it is funny for most of its length, it builds toward an ending so heavy and so human that it stays with people for years. The story begins with Butters. He sees a magazine picture of the famous reality star, perfectly smoothed and reshaped, and he believes with all his heart that this is simply what she looks like. To him, the flawless image is real. Wendy, who has always been the sensible one, tries to fix his mistake by teaching him about the editing software that changes these pictures. She takes a photo of a classmate named Lisa and alters it right in front of him, reshaping the girl into a perfect, glossy version of herself, hoping that watching the trick happen will break the spell. The plan backfires completely. Butters does not learn that the perfect image is fake. He falls in love with the perfect image, even though he watched Wendy build the lie with his own eyes. The polished picture is so appealing that he wants it to be true, and so he decides that it is. From there, the sickness spreads through the whole town. Everyone begins treating the edited pictures as the real thing. Clyde proudly shows off his improved girlfriend, the perfected version from the photo, even though the actual girl is standing right there, looking like a normal person. The boys start asking the girls for updated pictures, meaning edited ones, preferring the fake images to the real faces of the people they see every day. The strangest part is that nobody seems bothered by the gap. They interact with the real people, who plainly look different from their pictures, and they simply ignore what their own eyes tell them, choosing the polished lie over the living truth standing in front of them. The fake has become the standard, and the real has become a disappointment. Wendy refuses to go along with it. She speaks out against the edited pictures, trying to make people see that they are chasing something that does not exist, that they are holding real girls to a measure no real girl could ever meet. And for her honesty, she is punished. She becomes an outcast, treated as a complainer and a troublemaker for daring to point out the obvious. The cheerleading squad turns against her. The other kids resent her for spoiling the fantasy they have all agreed to share. Even the school counselor pulls her aside to talk about the unkind things being said, treating her concern as the problem rather than the lie she is fighting. The girl who is right finds herself once again completely alone in being right, while everyone around her clings to the comfortable fake. Threaded through the episode is a running joke about the famous reality star herself, the woman whose edited image started it all. The children cruelly compare her to a hobbit, the short, odd-looking creatures from a famous fantasy story, claiming that without her photo editing, she looks nothing like her picture. Her famous boyfriend, a well-known musician, keeps showing up to defend her, insisting over and over that she is not a hobbit. But every time he tries, he ends up accidentally drawing more comparisons, piling up so many that by the end, even he no longer seems sure of what he is arguing. The joke is silly on its surface, and it earns plenty of laughs, but it carries the same hard point underneath. The real woman, whoever she actually is, has been so completely buried under her perfect images that nobody, not even the man who loves her, can quite say what is true anymore. And then the episode arrives at its ending, and the laughter stops. Wendy, exhausted and beaten, having fought the whole town alone and lost, finally gives up. She sits down at her computer by herself. She opens a picture of her own face, and quietly, with tears running down her cheeks, she begins to edit it, smoothing and reshaping her own image into the fake, perfect version that everyone has decided is the only acceptable thing to be. When she is finished, she sends the polished, false picture of herself out to everyone. The girl who knew better, who had seen the lie clearly and named it bravely, surrenders. She erases her real face and replaces it with the fantasy, not because she has been convinced it is true, but because she can no longer bear to be the only one refusing. The episode ends there, on her tears and her surrender, and it does not undo it. With that choice, to end on the surrender and leave it standing, is what makes the episode so powerful. The show almost always returns its world to normal by the closing minutes, snapping everything back so the next episode can begin fresh. This time it refuses. It lets Wendy break and stay broken. broken. It does not send in a last-minute rescue or a tidy lesson or a joke to soften the blow. It simply shows a girl alone in her room, crying as she deletes herself, and then it lets the screen go dark. The refusal to fix it is the whole point. Some things, the ending suggests, do not get fixed. Sometimes the pressure simply wins, and a good person who knew better gives in anyway, and the world keeps spinning as if nothing happened. This connects all the way back to a story told much earlier in this series, the one about the empty hotel heiress who taught a town full of little girls to chase her hollow kind of fame. In that earlier episode, Wendy had been the one who refused. She had stood apart from the craze, kept her head, and held on to herself while everyone else lost theirs. She paid for it with loneliness, but she did not break. 10 years of the show later, with a new empty celebrity at the center and a new lie to resist, Wendy is the holdout once again. Only this time the holdout loses. This time the loneliness becomes too much, and the sensible girl who always stayed true to herself finally cannot do it anymore. The arc that began with her quiet strength ends with her quiet defeat, and the two episodes together tell a longer, sadder story about how much harder it gets to keep refusing year after year as the lie grows bigger and the crowd agreeing to it grows larger. The surrender also rhymes with the moment from the episode about the falling bar, where a disgusted boy gave up his standards the instant he noticed everyone around him had given up theirs. That boy surrendered with a shrug, deciding that if everyone else was fine with the low thing, he could be fine with it too. Wendy surrenders the same way, looking around at a whole town that has accepted the fake images and finding she has no strength left to stand alone against all of them. But where the boy gave up something small and distant, a feeling about a television show, Wendy gives up something as close and personal as it gets. She gives up her own face. The collective surrender that the falling bar episode described in the abstract is shown here as a single private wound, a real cost paid by one real feeling person, alone, in tears. The crowd that lowers the bar is made of individuals, and this is what it looks like when one of them finally lets go. The deeper idea pulls the whole long story down from the level of the crowd to the level of a single heart. For 10 cases now, the show has talked about the audience as a vast thing, millions of viewers whose collective choices power the machine and drag the standards down. It has been a story about everyone, about the mass of people watching. This final episode does something different. It zooms past the millions and the ratings and the networks, all the way in until only one girl remains, sitting at her screen, and in her tears it shows the truth that the big numbers always hide. The audience is not a faceless mass. It is made of people, one at a time, each carrying the weight of what the screen tells them they should be. The reality fame, the perfect impossible images, the constant message that the natural self is never good enough. All of it lands, in the end, not on a crowd but on a person. A girl who only wanted to be able to like what she saw in the mirror and who was taught, relentlessly, that what she saw was wrong. The episode handles this with a tenderness the show rarely allowed itself. The comedy is real for most of the runtime. The Hobbit jokes and the boyfriend tying himself in knots, and the boys preferring edited pictures to actual humans. But the show never lets the audience forget that a real person sits at the center of the joke. Both the famous woman buried under her own images and the ordinary girl crushed by trying to measure up to them. When the laughter finally clears and only Wendy and her tears are left, the shift does not feel like a betrayal of the comedy. It feels like the thing the comedy was protecting all along, the soft and serious heart that the jokes had been carefully circling. The episode landed well with people who watched the show closely. Reviewers praised it, with several calling it one of the strongest endings the show had produced and pointing to Wendy's story as some of the best work the series had ever done with her. One writer admitted that the final scene genuinely shook him and singled out the show's brave choice not to return the world to normal afterward as the very thing that gave the ending its power. Another called it the sharpest piece of social commentary in its whole season. For a show built on shock and crude jokes and gross out gags, earning that kind of quiet, heartfelt praise for an ending about a crying girl at a computer was no small thing. It proved that the same show that gave the world chanting crab monsters and spaghetti wrestling could also, when it chose to, break your heart. What lingers afterward is that last image, and it lingers longer than almost anything else the show ever made. A girl alone in a dim room, the glow of a screen on her wet face, deleting her real self and replacing it with a lie because the world gave her no other way to belong. There is no punchline after it. There is no rescue. The show simply lets it be true and lets the screen go dark, trusting the audience to sit with the weight of it. Anyone who has ever felt not good enough while staring at a perfect, impossible image recognizes that room and that glow and that quiet surrender. The episode wrapped its hardest truth not in monsters or chaos this time, but in stillness, in one girl giving up, and the stillness is what makes it land deeper than any joke ever could. For a long parade of episodes, the show had pointed its camera at the screen and at the people watching it, taking apart one kind of reality program after another, until until at last, it pointed the camera at a single girl and showed the private cost of everything the others had described. Stepping back now from that dim and quiet room, away from Wendy and her glowing screen, the whole long line of shows comes into view at once, all of them together, and the pattern that runs through every single one finally becomes clear. The thing the show had been trying to say, across all these years and all these episodes, about the screen, about the people in front of it, and about what watching does to the ones who watch, is ready to be put into a single answer. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.